How y'all doing? Can y'all hear us? I'm honored to be on stage and honored to be asked to come here by John Hope Bryant and be here today. So I just want to give another round of applause to the young men we have up here today. Thank y'all for being here. And we have the future. I use notes. I was taught to always keep notes by my elementary school teacher. So you guys, I ain't gonna ask for forgiveness because I like reading. We know that black culture has pushed and stemmed this culture in this country forward. I don't care if you're talking about who really invented the cotton gin, to who put in the work and labor to build this country from bricks and nails standpoint. We know that we've contributed, whether it was music through rock and roll, blues, gospel, rap, and more, whether it was television. I know Norman Lear was a heck of a producer, but I know a black man wrote those shows. So all that to say that black culture has been a fuel that put this country on the forefront on many things, and I would like to talk about these people or talk with these people today. So the first question is for all. The black community has been on the forefront of cultural prominence through the world. How should we prioritize maintaining ownership and control of that influence in media, music, and other industries? And we'll start with anyone who wants to start.
Okay, I'll say two things. First, we must believe in each other. We must believe in each other, and we must believe in ourselves because we see ourselves in each other.
Amen.
And in that belief comes investment. When we can take the money that, a lot of people, excuse my language, but a lot of people think the white people's ice is colder. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When we can come to each other within our own communities and invest in things that would allow equity and ownership, you know, we could share it with each other rather than go somewhere else and have someone else have that equity and ownership.
Yeah. So we're going to get to Boris next, but I really like what you said about believing in one another, because to believe in one another, you're believing in yourself because you see one another and
right.
one another. I think about, record company deals. A lot of people didn't want to sign with smaller companies, but take T-Pain, for instance. He always uses the example of having a bigger opportunity at a larger company for one song versus building a career by signing with Akon for considerably less money, but he's had a much longer career. So that's an example, I think, of two black people who believed in one another, and the results have been over 20 years of hit making from Mr. Payne. Boris, what do you think as an actor and more around that, our culture and cultural investment? What could we do?
Well, I got to go back because one of the things that I realized was that this country still prioritizes the protection of whiteness over dealing with racism, inequality, wealth gap, all those things, and that it is really, like you said, it's up to us to continue to, like you so eloquently put it, Mike, what was it? To plot, plan, organize, mobilize?
Plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize.
Exactly. So we've been plotting and planning for a while now, right? I think it's time for us to really focus on the mobilizing part, the creating synergy part, the partnership part. And as I alluded to yesterday, it's something we're not good at. And it's something that we have to practice. We have to practice having conversations with each other. We have to practice asking for help. If you're in your house and you're trying to figure out how to compete with your brother and sister, it's a wasted day. They have separated us from our brothers and sisters for the past 400 years, divide and conquer. They have taken our language, they have taken our names, they've taken our customs. And we have to understand that the power that we have lies in the volume. The power that we have lies in us collectively. The creative industry is a $2.5 trillion industry that we control. We are the cultural leaders. We are the social influencers. The buying power that they're talking about black people have is 1.5 trillion. That's not true. The collective buying power we have is $4.5 trillion. Because we're not 40 million black people. We're 2 billion black people. So we got to shift our perspective and stop working in silos and focus on each other and how we can make changes together.
All right. Scott, moving to you in the plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize part, You as the CEO of BET, running the largest black media company, essentially you are the organizing and mobilizing part. It's not a dream, it's not aspirational, it's not a what if, it's not a what could be. You on an everyday basis are the tip of the spear. You on an everyday basis have a workforce that is primarily black. How does this impact you as not only a CEO, because we know you gotta sell stuff, but as a black man, how does that affect you?
Well, I appreciate the question. And I think context is important. We're talking about black culture. Why is it so relevant? I would posit that black culture is arguably one of the single most valuable assets that we have in the black community. Other communities have been able to accumulate lots of other things that have extraordinary value. And one of the things that the black community has created that is of almost absolutely universal appeal is black culture. And if you understand the role that black culture has had in creating black wealth in this country, it's pretty extraordinary. The very first black American billionaire, right, created a business that was anchored in black culture. And if you think about our community, even today, while we've had more opportunities to create wealth in areas outside of culture, we have more people who are creating wealth in finance and technology and real estate, but the reality is there's still a disproportionate fraction of black wealth that is actually being generated by people who are in, around, adjacent to, and leveraging our culture overall. So it's profoundly important. And at BET, we use our position to have black culture be the through line for everything we do. It's built into our DNA because we have this perspective that black culture is effectively the operating system for how the black community functions, right? It influences and reflects how we think about things, how we respond to things, our aspirations, some of our fundamental and foundational values, issues, focuses, and priorities. And so for us, sitting at the intersection of our community as a portal for our community, people who want to reach our community and to engage our community, we really take the perspective that black culture is such an important asset that has to be respected, celebrated, and elevated. And we do that in our shop by really focusing on what role do we have to play to always be supportive of strengthening our culture. And there are just a couple of quick examples I'll use. One is obviously through our shows, we aspire to identify extraordinary examples of people and opportunities and moments in our culture and elevate them and celebrate them. Two, to Tip's point earlier, we are focused extraordinarily on collaboration, working with creative partners, business partners. Three, we understand that the culture's really anchored in ownership and opportunity. And so we don't just do traditional deals with people. A lot of the times when we work with big partners, we say, yes, we'll enter into a traditional arrangement, but also let's create an equity opportunity, right? So when we did our big deal with Tyler Perry, we said, yes, we'll do a big programming deal with you, but in addition, let's create a joint venture where you have equity in the streamer BET+. When we work with Kenya Barris, yes, we'll do a big overall deal with you, but let's create a joint venture where you have equity in BET Studios. And so we really think it's our responsibility. To use our position to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support the culture.
Man, that's amazing. It's dope that you mentioned Tyler because he has been a shining example. I also would like to add 50 Cent has now opened up studios. We just got a rumor that Cat Williams has done the same. Yeah. Do you anticipate, as the runner of BT, do you anticipate seeing more artists matriculate into executive positions in which studios and more will be open?
I absolutely do. I think in part, our culture is a portal for people. I mean, I think hip hop's the best example of this. I always wonder when you look at the people who've been most successful in hip hop, and then they've gone on and created successful businesses and what have you. One question is, well, did they start in hip hop because they're artists first, or did they start in hip hop because there's so many barriers in our community for people to actually just start as a business person, right? That you actually have to go through and you have to become a big celebrity and make a little bit of money and develop those relationships. And then you're invited into rooms and you're given opportunities and you get access to capital in ways that in our community most people don't have, right? And so I think that we'll see more and more people using the portal that is our culture to create more business opportunities, because I think ultimately more of our community wants to be business people.
Stephen, man, you're one of my favorite people on television. You're not afraid to give. I own barbershops. You give some of the best barbershop debates. I got to get you in my barbershop debating. Culturally, what I see you have the ability to do is disagree without being disagreeable, the ability to admit in times that I've been wrong and not be afraid to assert when you're right. You are the black man that stands on the blocks that makes sure the boys don't do the bullshit after school and they get to school. And you are a figure that we know, but you've brought that to a broader audience and it's been received well. How important is Black cultural capital to you? And what do you see our need going into the next 2, 5, 10, or 20, 50, and 100 years to be?
Well, it's everything to me because I'm a black man and I'm proud to be a black man. But I think that what's incredibly important is that the word accountability is what enters my mind. I just had the pleasure of meeting Scott. I've known Boris, been my brother for years, and T.I., great people, accomplished a lot of great things. But the one thing that resonates, you know when people are equally yoked, when you run across them. Everybody that's black ain't down for black causes. And it's really important to emphasize that because I certainly wouldn't accuse anybody on this stage of being guilty of that. But I would defy anybody to deny that what I just said about us as a people is true. And when I think about my role in terms of being on television, I roll up on ESPN, and long before it was popular, they had Stuart Scott, the great late Stuart Scott, God rest his soul, that pioneered and spearheaded so many opportunities, but there were other people before him. There's a guy that was before him that's still around, and Mike Wilbon. There's the late, great Ralph Wiley. There's the late, great Brian Burwell. There were so many, John Saunders and others. There were so many different people. And when you're on television and you're pounding that pavement and you're preaching about black culture, well, let me give you a taste of it from a talent perspective. We're in the media. It's the fourth estate, which means it has a license to formulate perceptions about people, about communities, about human beings, etc. And for every story we told, there's 10 to 20 different stories that we fought to make sure wasn't disseminated to the masses. But the second we miss something, we're a sellout. We're a coon. We're all of these negative connotations that come into play with people that come from your community that supposedly are the embodiment of black culture, but don't see when somebody's right in front of their face fighting on behalf of the culture, recognizing the importance of sacrificing your behind because of the stupidness you did in support of the collective whole. And when we don't pay attention to that, then we compromise what T.I., what Boris, and what Scott just articulated. Because we don't have the courage to accept and embrace accountability for the action. I'm not talking character. Nobody should be character assassinated. Nobody should be stigmatized across the board. And you know what? You're defined by your worst mistake. But in the end, when you make a mistake, it's your own that comes at you trying to castigate you that way. And then we get in the way of our own progress. I'll give you a perfect example before I move on. So you got athletes that were doing documentaries and shows and stuff like that. And I remember they were doing something on the Tulsa riots, Black Wall Street, 1920s, okay? When blacks, everybody talking about, we don't want a handout. We don't want, you just want a handout. You're about the government. Well, we weren't. We were independent thinkers. We were business owners. We were property owners. We were all of these things. And then white folks came about the business of terrorizing the town to make sure that you couldn't develop and elevate yourself. We had athletes that were doing documentaries on this. I'm sitting there on national television saying, hello, come promote it. You don't want to because you mad that I called out you shot 2 for 20. Now, what kind of sense does that make? It's like
You and Cameron terrorizing the athletes.
I only use that as an example in closing to highlight my biggest point. We get in our own way because the mission is bigger than me. It's bigger than you. I didn't invite you on the show because I'm in love with you. I invited you on the show because what you're doing is so important.
Absolutely.
That you shooting 2 for 20 don't matter.
Absolutely.
It was about that.
Absolutely.
But too many of us can't see beyond that 2 for 20 performance, figuratively speaking. And it gets in the way of our own progress. And that's a story that's never told enough.
All right. We got to. Young man, because Aunt criticized you does not mean he hate you. And the bigger story is come tell your bigger story.
2 for 20 is 2 for 20.
2 for 20 is 2 for 20. Boris.
Yes, sir.
You are a world citizen. You are a 3-passport holder. And I've been blessed by singing and dancing to travel the world 5 times. And I've understood that black people pretty much, we ain't much different anywhere I go. We like beans, we like rice, we eat a good bowl of chicken. No matter where we go, we cook good food. But I've realized that places we go, a lot of times we're still holding the 1 or 2 rung, bottom rung of the ladder. And to matriculate up, I always felt like we needed to have more cross collaboration. We needed to reach across the waters back. We needed to make sure if we're in Australia, we visit Perth, because there are a lot of black folks there. I know if we're running through Asia, where are we at there? I just left Rotterdam, which I'd not spent a lot of time in. I'm usually in Amsterdam, stone like a rock. I was in Rotterdam this time and learned of the rich cultural black history that's there. Could you tell us how important it is that black people, although identifying locally, need to think and connect globally, and how important that's been to you and what it can do for us in the next 20, 50, and 100 years?
Wow. Well, it's hugely important. Number one, growing up between Europe and Africa and seeing America in the distance, there was McDonald's, there was the flag, and there was Michael Jackson. Those are sort of the images that were being broadcast around the world, and that's what makes a lot of people want to come here. The U.S. is a place. I want to be really careful.
Take your time.
Yeah, I want to be really careful.
Consult Stephen A.
Take your time.
Look, let's put it this way. The black experience has been primarily defined through the prism of the African American experience. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Movies, TV shows, music has been dominated by the African American culture, which has also limited us as African people. We are all African people. Every single person in here is African. I don't care if you're white or black. Everybody in here is African. And it has that perspective has limited us to believing that we are a minority. We're actually the vast majority on this planet. Black and brown people make up 84% of this planet. So we all have believed the hype, which has tremendously stifled us and limited us in our thinking, and thereby in how we behave and act. Now, we are all in an industry that creates narratives. We have the power to not only create narratives and then let them be exploited, but control and own our narratives. And what happens when we own and control our narrative, we control perception. Perception is the biggest challenge that we have as black people and as a continent of Africa as a whole. When we think of Africa, we think of what? Zebras and huts. We think of poverty, we think of famine, we think of corruption and mass exodus to Europe or whatever. We don't think about diversity, 3,000 different languages, culturally historic sites, beaches more beautiful than anywhere else in the world, architecture, the most powerful work for the youngest people on the planet. Average age of Americans is 36. Average age of Europeans, 42. Average age of Africans, 19. Africa's getting younger, everybody else is getting older. The entire creative industry is shifting to Africa in the next 10 years, just by way of numbers. We have 800 million smartphones in Africa. It's going to go up to 1.4 billion smartphones in Africa. High-speed internet penetration is 15%. Here it's 95%. What do you think is going to happen when that penetration goes up to 40, 50%, 60%? So our perspective needs to change. And with it, our willingness, like Stephen just put it, to work together. I reminded people yesterday to stand up and say, I need help. We have to do the same thing in our industries. We are the leaders of our industries, and yet we keep going for the check rather than for ownership. We have to understand that we hold the responsibility. We are standing on the shoulders of the Denzel Washingtons, on the Sidney Poitiers of the world, and we have the responsibility, and we have to be accountable for the fact that we have to not just open doors, we have to own rooms. We have to own the table that everybody keeps talking about. And nothing, like you just said, nothing is standing in our way except ourselves.
Speaking of ownership, I got a stubborn little homeboy who about 20 years ago called himself the king of the South. Pissed a lot of people off. A lot of old rappers got mad. But then, man, a little tilted hat dude, skinny kid, went out and proved it. And I've seen him, even before partnering with him, because he's my partner, but he's also my business partner now in a restaurant called Bankhead Seafood that's 3 miles away. Purchased from a woman who owned it 50 years. Tip, you've built businesses, you've advocated for economic empowerment within the black community. People told you were crazy when you start saying, I'm gonna self-finance my own films, I'm gonna direct my own films, I'm gonna do my own comedy, I'm going to own a record company, give other people like the amazing Young Dro and PSC an opportunity, even myself. You are not only one of the absolute greatest rappers the South has ever produced, you've been one of the most dominant and prominent businessmen created out of the rap community in this city. What led you to understand the importance of ownership and not just participating as an artist?
Well, different things led me to understand the importance of ownership in different facets of business.
Yes, sir.
I understood ownership in music because when I said I wanted to be a rapper, my uncle, he said, well, you need to go and learn everything it is about, you know, what is valuable in the music industry. So I went and bought the book, Donald Passman, All You Need to Know About the Music Industry, music business, and I read it at 10 years old.
Yeah.
You know, 10, 11, 12 years old. So I understood, and hit me in, the book hit me in. I understood what a good deal was, what a bad deal was. I understood what publishing was, what mechanical rights was. I understood that very early. So that is what allowed me to understand that in music. In film, what allowed me to understand it was I just got tired of waiting on other people to see me in a position before I could actually allow myself to be in that position. I did a show with my wife, my family, and my children that is really, you know, like a visual photo album of all my children growing up called Family Hustle, and I did it at Viacom with VH1. I did it, you know, before Scott was running the show over there. But we spent, I think, maybe 13 seasons, maybe 11 years of our life, you know, opening the doors of our homes, sharing our experiences, and one vicious, nefarious tale.
Based on bullshit.
Based on bullshit with no substance, no validity, no truth to it. One vicious, nefarious lie caused them to pull the plug, close the door, never even called to ask me to say, is this true or not? Never waited on due process, never get one, and not just for myself, but for my family.
Yes, sir.
To see my family be subjected to that. Said, you know what, man? I'm gonna put my little money together. I don't care how much it costs or how good anyone else thinks it is. I'm going to begin to make films that I produce, I finance, that I direct, telling stories that I want to tell without asking anyone for permission. And we started with one. We started with one, and it, you know, it did well. We've since financed another, and we've produced 3 films now. And we intend, that was last year. I intend to produce 3 more this year, and so on and so forth. And so I guess to answer that question plainly, it was out of sheer necessity.
Amen. Amen.
Sheer necessity is what caused me to understand.
And that's how I know a white man didn't invent the cotton gin. let me give you, we only have 4 minutes left. We only have 4 minutes left, but I think it's important that I say this because for Scott to even say, as a lead of BET, he didn't understand how cross-sectioned Atlanta was in terms of celebrity, private equity and money, and politics working cohesively. I think that was the goal of Maynard and Andy. Ultimately, everyone from Shirley to Bill, to every mayor we've had here has understood that. The 4 men that are on here, I want you to give me something about Atlanta that you think black people need to know to come here, to plant their flag here, in order to make what's here compound and grow even more. In my mind, Atlanta should be the capital of the black world because the opportunity is here. Not because we're better, not because we got it all figured out, but we figured out cooperating. We figured out political money, political process and private money cooperating. We figured out how to help entertainers and athletes become business people. And I'm talking about Hank Aaron, not just T.I. I'm talking about we have over 120-year history of succeeding on multiple fronts here. What can black people bring to this city that will help in your particular interest or help us overall? I'd like to know, starting with Steve. Besides another athlete, because we got a lot of them too.
Well, don't get me started with them. I won't do that today. When you talk about Atlanta being the capital, I would say to you, respectfully, think bigger. Mm-hmm. I don't know about anybody else, but I ain't playing. Go for it. Let Atlanta be a hub. When you see people like yourself and T.I. here and stuff like that, okay, that's cool. That's beautiful. But if everything is condensed in one small area, in my eyes, that makes you a stationary target.
Gotcha.
And I don't like being a stationary target. To hit me with a knockout blow, you need to have to come from a multitude of angles to pull that off. And when you talk about black people, the chances of you being able to pull that off is slim to none. So what I would say to Atlanta, what helped make Atlanta what it is right now? It wasn't just the people here. It was Atlanta attracting an abundance of people here from everywhere.
Amen.
And they branched out, and all of a sudden, Atlanta became a moving target. It was a hub,
Amen.
but it became a moving target. And that is what I would ask you to remember about yourself.
So we
as
need more
Atlantans.
Negroes in Atlanta. Bring your talents to Atlanta. We would love to have you.
So they can branch out.
Yes,
So
sir.
they can branch out and represent Atlanta
Absolutely.
even when they ain't in Atlanta.
Amen. Amen.
So we're at an extraordinary time in this country, as we all know. And I think for a lot of people, it's an opportunity to think about the road ahead.
Yes, sir.
And I think in particular for the Black community, where there's a lot of fragmentation. The reality is, as we all know, there's extraordinary diversity within the Black community, so it's not a single monolithic thing. But notwithstanding that, there's still extraordinary fragmentation. And I think to the point everybody's been making, that fragmentation is a limiting factor on our success as a community. And I think what we see in Atlanta that you don't see in New York, where I live, you don't see in LA, is this level of collaboration across a multitude of areas. And that model, I think, could be a very powerful model for the Black folks in New York to understand and figure out how to deploy, and the Black folks in LA to understand and figure out how to deploy. And I think if we could do that, we'd actually get to some of these aspirations that we're talking about where people are working more collaboratively. So I would propose that Atlanta export that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what you're talking, and you were saying is the private, public sector and the entertainment sector cross-section here in a much different ways than other places.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Boris.
To piggyback what Scott just said, I think, focus on exporting goods and services, not talent.
Gotcha.
Owning talent, protecting talent, owning IP. It's great that Tyler owns a part of BET streaming. It's great that Kenya owns a part of BET Studios. Who owns the other part? You need to own the other part. We need to help you own the other part.
I appreciate
Because as long as we don't own the majority of BET, as an example, his show is going to be canceled. When we own the other part of BET, his show won't be canceled. There will be 7 spinoffs. So yes, this is a great beginning, but let's keep focusing on ownership. Let's keep focusing on protecting IP and talent, and let's do it together. Let's stop working in silos. Let's do it together. Everybody in this room can contribute. Ask for help, and we can work this out together.
All right.
I will begin by saying that of all of the problems that plague our community as Black people, 99% of them would be solved simply by us sticking together. So, while I agree with everything everyone on stage said about the answer to your question, I will say this jokingly, but with a very strong hint of seriousness. Send your money, but keep your ass where it's at, because we full in Atlanta. You hear me?
Oh, wow. Wow.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Send the money, but keep your ass where it's at, okay?
I want to say that Charles Blow has a book called The Devil You Know. He has a documentary called Black Power Down South, and I would like to encourage people by letting them know that 54% of all African Americans live in the South. Atlanta is not perfect, but it has been a great example the last 120 some odd years of what's possible. And I mean that from everybody from David T. Howard to the millionaires we've created. What I want us to do is create a Birmingham, a Charlotte, a Jacksonville, a Tampa, a Savannah, a Macon, so that the South becomes a hub for Black ingenuity and money. Thank you, gentlemen, for your day. I appreciate you so much, and I leave with a lot more hope than I came in with. Thank you.